दर्शकवृन्द नमस्ते। भूराजनीतिक हिसाबले संवेदनशील रहेको नेपालमा शक्ति राष्ट्रहरूको चासो बढ्दो छ। यसलाई कूटनीतिका जानकारहरू मुलुकमा शक्ति राष्ट्रहरूको चलखेल बढेको भनेर बुझ्ने गर्छन्। सरकार भने सबैको इच्छा र चाहनालाई आफू अनुकूल प्रयोग गरेर विकास र समृद्धिको लक्ष्य हासिल गर्ने अवसर प्राप्त भएको छ भन्ने गर्दछ। यसै मेसोमा आज हामीले राजनीति, कूटनीति र अमेरिकी चासोका विषयमा विभिन्न जिज्ञासाको समाधान खोज्न नेपालका लागि अमेरिकी राजदूत र्यान्डी बेरीलाई कार्यक्रम फायरसाइडमा निम्त्याएका छौं। Ambassador Randy Berry, welcome to Fireside.
Thank you very much. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Now let's start our conversation with taking out some real hot potatoes out of the oven. When the Chinese foreign minister visited Nepal, and post that, the Chinese Foreign Office came out with this communique that hinted or probably meant that Nepal is not part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Were you bothered?
Thank you for asking that question. I think it's given me a good opportunity to talk and to really set the record straight a little bit on what is meant by the Indo-Pacific strategy. First of all, though, let me just start out by saying that the United States relationship with Nepal for over 70 years really has been driven on a bilateral basis and has been driven on the basis of shared goals, shared objectives. I think that relationship is not necessarily affected by other relationships in any sort of negative way. There has been a lot of misinformation around the concept of the Indo-Pacific strategy. What we mean when we talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy really is just a way that we talk about our policy, about American policy, about the commitment that we bring to all of our policy engagements throughout the region, which basically addresses the issue of how do we work to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific based on an international rules-based order that is marked by anti-corruption, by transparency. That's really the beginning and the end of it. So the core of the policy really is something that we do, although I know there have been other connotations that have been suggested to it.
Mm-hmm. But a mention in the communique, does that bother you?
Well, again, I'm more focused on the quality, the tenor of our relationship, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be affected by any other party. That the quality of our conversation, the quality of our partnership, the quality of the joint priorities that we've set with the government of Nepal are the same today as they were 10 years ago when I had a chance to serve in this country, and I think go all the way back to the very beginning of our relationship back in the late 1940s.
Mm-hmm. I might just call it a surprise or a little controversial when the Indo-Pacific strategy was published through Pentagon, not the State Department. Doesn't that bother anybody else?
There are reams of reports, of speeches, of statements on the Indo-Pacific strategy from our president, from the Secretary of State, from many other different agencies that play a part in the U.S. policymaking process. I'm familiar with the report that you're citing, which is a Department of Defense report covering an important issue related to security, because again, our policy is founded in basically promoting a free, open, and secure Indo-Pacific. So security is an important pillar of our engagement, but it's not the only pillar. So that, I think if we dig a little deeper, you'll see initiatives on the economic side. For example, the U.S. is hosting a regional economic and investment conference down in Bangkok for the region very, very soon to support our economic pillar. We are working on issues related to good governance as it pertains to the Indo-Pacific strategy as well. So there are really many, many aspects of this. But what I see cited really is a single report that does focus on one element of our relationship, but not by any means characterizing the breadth of that relationship.
But for a common man to understand, how much is it military? How much is it development and progress?
What I can tell you is that the nature of our military engagement here, which again goes back decades, is not different now than it was 10 years ago at the end of the conflict. It's not different than it was 5 years ago. It's not different than it was 2 years ago. That our military to military engagement really has been focused on priorities that the Nepal government has set for itself, that we have always, through our military relationship, addressed needs that are identified by the Nepali government. So on issues related to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, for example, or joint planning exercises for responding in the event of an emergency, such as an earthquake. That's the nature of our military-to-military relationship, then and now.
But there are reports that American military personnel were engaged or they were part of a training of a high-altitude mountain warfare training back in Mustang last year.
Let me tell you about the nature of military-to-military engagement as I know it. And that is that we are involved in joint training exercises that really benefit both countries. So, for example, we can bring our expertise in for example, rescue and search and rescue operations. But we also have something to learn here because we know we have a Nepali counterpart here that can talk to us in terms and make us better at high altitude rescue. That makes us better in the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief area. But let me tell you about another form of military-to-military engagement that's very, very important to me. That we saw the benefits of that very constructive process come to fruition in 2015, when we saw the Nepal Army and other emergency responders here respond to the great need of the 2015 earthquake with professionalism, with efficiency, and that saved lives. Now, during that same operation, we saw the crash of a U.S. military helicopter here that cost the lives not only of several Nepalis, but also of 6 young Americans as well. To me, that's the core of this relationship, that you have 6 young Americans who are coming here, yes, in a military helicopter, but to do life-saving work in partnership with a partner that we have been working with for decades. That's a success story any way you want to cut it.
I'm pretty sure you've picked up from the Nepalese parliament that there was a discussion and there was a point raised that quite a few American military personnel are on the ground in Nepal. As the ambassador of the US, can you tell us the kind of number that we are hosting at the moment?
I don't have an exact number in mind, but what I can tell you is that, again, there has not been any increase in the number or frequency of our engagements over the past several years. That although there is, I think, a process right now of talking about this as if it's something new, in fact, this is not. This is a continuation of a very well-intentioned, very much valued relationship on both sides going back decades, again, on the issues of humanitarian relief, disaster response, and helping Nepal prepare for its global security role as a troop contributing nation to peacekeeping operations. That's the total sum of it.
And if I may take you back on the Indo-Pacific strategy again, there was a meeting between our foreign minister and the US Secretary of State in Washington. Can we make it more clear to a common man again? Does Nepal need to sign anything to be part of the strategy?
The Indo-Pacific strategy is not an alliance. It is not an organization. It is not any sort of entity to which Nepal has been asked to join. In fact, I noted at a speech yesterday, in fact, no country has joined the Indo-Pacific strategy, and that's because no other country has been asked to join it. It's not that sort of thing. That the Indo-Pacific strategy really is a label we give towards policy. That's not unusual in American terms, that if you think back to the last administration where we talked about our priorities in Asia as a pivot to Asia, or subsequent to that, a rebalance towards Asia. So I wouldn't get too caught up in the terminology. What I can tell you is that the nature of our engagement, the nature of our programming, the nature of our funding and our advocacy and our discussion with the government really follows a very storied historical pattern of engagement on issues, on values that are shared between Nepal and the United States, and how we can see joint progress. There's not a lot that's new there.
And there is a whisper, and there is a hearsay, to be more precise, that the American government has basically outsourced South Asia to the Asia-Pacific Command in Hawaii.
Well, I'd rather leave hearsay on the shelf and deal with real fact. The real fact is that here, the nature of our engagement on the development front, which is historic and has unmistakably not just improved lives, but saved lives. If you look at something that's newer, for example, with the MCC Compact, where we're looking at infrastructure development, those are facts. Those are facts on the ground. Those are facts that are delivering results and can deliver results. That again, I would even say to the degree that our military-to-military relationship has been important, it's been important for ways that are important for Nepal as well. In order to be able to respond more effectively to natural disaster, in order to be able to fulfill its role as a peacekeeping nation. That's it.
But if you just look at the record of the past few years, most of the dignitaries visiting Nepal belong to the military than the civilian side of governance of the U.S.
Well, you know, I would say that the nature of our relationship often brings people to Nepal shores, often sees Nepalis come here. I wouldn't necessarily measure the priority with who is here at any one moment, because I think the drivers of our policy, the drivers of our program partnership, for example, with Nepal, really don't lend themselves to the same kind of photo op or one-stop tours through here. I'm much more focused on the content of these relationships and the content of the policy and the content of the programs. You know, those you can measure in real, tangible terms. That what I think would be a mistake is if we were to simply characterize or reduce the relationship to the number of photo ops or who sits with whom, because I think photo ops are easy. I think building a relationship of consequence that delivers results for the Nepali people, that's hard. But we are committed to maintaining that kind of relationship because that's where America's interests have always been best served here.
But is a high-level visit amongst friends a very necessary brick to the wall we built together for 70 years? Do you see our president visiting the White House very soon, or the American president being hosted in Nepal very soon?
Well, we don't have any plans for that, but I certainly don't think that's out of the realm of expectation. What I do think, though, is important is to not confuse visits with progress in the relationship. That I certainly am committed to elevating the political contact with the government and elevating the nature of our conversation, because I think that makes good sense. But I also don't think that's a substitute for actual progress on key objectives. That's what we've been working on very much my first year here, which I'm about to notch up, in looking at ways that we can help partner with Nepal, take a look at this period of unprecedented political stability and see how we turn that into improved economic indicators, for example, or see how we turn that into improved foreign direct investment figures, or how we see that really yield, for example, employment benefits for Nepalis so they don't see their best chance for employment outside the confines of this country. That I really want to focus on those kinds of building blocks of the relationship, because that's at the core, that's at the foundation, that's the way it's always been in 70 years. Visits can be an important, I think, culmination to some of those efforts, but I don't think they're a replacement for it.
But if we talk about exchanges of visits, it's not just the US and Nepal exchanging visits, but there are other dignitaries who are willing to come to Nepal, and Nepal is willing to host them. And in the near future, Chinese president is expected to visit Nepal, and we're ready to host him. But before that happens, there is a kind of a gimmick that is staged in Nepal. The Chinese Communist Party hosts the Nepalese Communist Party and creates a symposium kind of a situation in teaching Nepalese communists the Chinese way of politics. And soon after that, your movement in Kathmandu was registered, where you met the former Prime Minister Sherbad Deuba and former Prime Minister Madhav Nepal. Does it have a connection, or it was just a casual courtesy call?
You know, one of the building blocks of a diplomat's job is really to get out there and meet people. And the range of visits that I've had with former prime ministers, the current prime minister, with leaders in business, this is all pretty standard diplomatic fare. Regarding party conversations, I really don't know much about that because I know that for my own country, our role, our engagement here really is to take a temperature of the government, see what priorities have been set, and then see how we can go about building our relationship based on that. That we've never been in a position to talk to the Nepali government or leaders about ideology or anything else, because that's really that's outside of our realm. That my conversations really talk about those key concrete achievements that we've got. Taking a look at MCC, for example, which is our best and most honest effort to really get out there and see what we can do to build some infrastructure and to really create a buzz around Nepal that is truly open for business, for example. That's the crux of the conversations that we're having. And also to straighten the record on the Indo-Pacific strategy, to make sure that the understanding that we have, that we are as clear as possible on policy so that we can make progress on the tangible expressions of those policies.
Does the MCC bundle with the Indo-Pacific strategy?
Well, the MCC was the compact that was founded with Nepal. I think there are a few things to really remember. One is that compact was first entered into under the Sherbahadur Deyuba government here and under the Obama administration in the United States. So this MCC process has been going on for some period of time. Also, this was a request that was brought to us. That MCC was not a program suggestion that was made to the government of Nepal. That the MCC compact is our best effort to respond to a suggestion, to a request from the Nepal government to address a critical infrastructure need, and also to help on the implementation side in a way that I think has not been done in Nepal before. So I think it's largely irrelevant of how you sort of package this up. It is what it is because it's based on internationally recognized norms. It is based on the need for transparency and anti-corruption. It is balanced on the need for implementation on a very strict timescale. We think that's the best possible thing we can do to establish a vote of confidence in Nepal that this country is deserving of foreign direct investment. That's critically important. I think trying to capture this into the Indo-Pacific strategy framework it can be problematic because, again, if we go back to the fundamentals of the Indo-Pacific strategy, it's our policy. You don't have to join it. You're not asked to join it. It is merely a way, a descriptor that we use of our best efforts to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific.
But what has Nepal vouched for? To join it or not join it?
Nepal was never asked. I think that's the wrong question to ask. Because again, this is the name that we give to our policy. We do not approach any other government in the region to ask them to join it.
But has Nepal volunteered to be part of it?
Again, it's the wrong question. That there is no partnership to be had here in terms of our partnership on policy. This is simply the name of American policy. For example, let me give you a corollary on the Nepal government side. Nepal's government has a policy of focusing on its neighbors first. Well, we have not joined that. But the reason we haven't is because we're not asked to, and it wouldn't be appropriate, because that's Nepal's policy, not the United States. So, we each pursue our own national security interests, we address our own policies, and this is a way, in the spirit of transparency and openness, that we talk about everything that we are doing to promote an Indo-Pacific region that is free, open, secure, and is bound by the rules that govern internationally recognized norms and relationships. We think that is the right key that will continue to see the rise of this region, but I think has also enabled the rise of the region to date. Because again, even though we've got a different title or name to the policy, what you have are a set of enduring values on which we've always engaged here. And that is based on openness, on transparency, on the rule of law. That's not new. That's all keeping in a long tradition of our engagement here.
And when we talk about the MCC, and you said it is time-bound, and the grant is of $500 million, and there is a matching fund that the Nepalese government also vouches on.
Yes.
Right? The ratification in the parliament is taking way too long than required, it looks. And we're told that the American establishment is worried that the time-bound nature of MCC is going to expire if we don't ratify it as quick as possible. So, as the ambassador to Nepal, is that a worry that you're sitting on right at the moment?
Well, I'd like to think about the MCC in a couple of different ways that I think it's important to focus on. First of all, this MCC compact is something unusual in that we have contributions both from the American and the Nepali side. That's not usually done, but I think that's a really good indicator. Second of all, that you have the infrastructure project that involves basically hydroelectric infrastructure and roads maintenance. But you have, in terms of the development, and a $630 million combined budget. But there's something more important at stake here that I think we need to talk about, and that is the time-bound nature of this compact. That the underlying principle, the foundation on which we enter into MCC compacts, is really to help partner with a country that is looking for foreign direct investment, that is looking for economic reforms, that is looking for standard business practice, that is something new that helps it compete better in the global economy. And this time-bound nature is essential to the quality of that. Because what we want to do is create a headline 5 years from now that says, is Nepal open for business? Major infrastructure project implemented on budget, on time, and according to every element of the compact. That's why the time-bound nature of this is critically important. So yes, I was slightly disappointed when we didn't see a ratification of the compact as is required during the last session. I am confident that we will see that occur when Parliament comes back into session. I would also note that there are other remaining precedents that need to be concluded. One of them was done just yesterday. So we are seeing a dwindling of the number of conditions precedent, as we call them, leading to eventual implementation. But I think the key point is we need to stay on target to make sure that when next June comes and we start the actual construction, that we are ready to go on day one.
Now, unfortunately, I have to take this opportunity to make a slight comparison between the policy that the US has adhered, the Indo-Pacific strategy, and neighbor first. China has come up with the Belt and Road Initiative, which Nepal is a signatory to. There is another hearsay that Indo-Pacific strategy is a strategy to encircle the Belt and Road Initiative led by China. Does that have any element of truth?
Well, again, I'd like to leave hearsay in the realm of hearsay and deal in fact. Now, I'm not a specialist in BRI. I don't know what BRI has done in Nepal, but what I can tell you is that the values that are contained within the Indo-Pacific strategy, if you look at the core of free and open governance, inclusive participatory democratic institutions, if you look at freedom of the media, you look at the other building blocks of a democracy, that's what we are engaging here every day with our partners in the Nepal government and with the Nepali people to further. That, I think, stands on its own. I think that relationship has been built over decades to stand for those very fundamental values. And I don't think that the comparison necessarily is one that carries any kind of resonance.
But I get the opportunity to meet quite a few experts in diplomacy in the show, and I tend to ask the same question over and over again. But most of them tell us that Nepal, because of its geopolitical standpoint, we have the BRI that is wanting to get into Nepal through their whatever list of things that they want through Nepal. And at the moment, the South Asian regional body, SAARC, has been a little paralyzed because of the tension between two of our other neighbors, India and Pakistan. On the other hand, India has taken the initiative of building BIMSTEC that takes Nepal out of the South Asian cocoon to a different Indian Ocean cocoon. And on top of that, there is the American Indo-Pacific strategy. And a lot of the experts tell me that can Nepal take this tug of war with strength? in a tug-of-war situation where foreign friends and powers are seeking Nepal as a playground for their interest in the region?
I can only talk from the American perspective, but let me say.
But do you feel?
Well, from the American perspective, I would reject the idea that that is happening, because I can tell you that the premise of that question has to do with Nepal only as a value relative to something else. I am here, I've brought my family here for the second time to work in this amazing country, which I think has great, great intrinsic value. I think she has people who will see her rise into the future and fulfill the aspirations that people really demand and deserve. That's the relationship that we're here working on. That I am not here to work on Nepal relative to any other country. My focus very much is on the partnership between the United States and between Nepal. And as far as it intersects with issues related to the Indo-Pacific strategy, which again goes back to the foundation of shared values and shared principles that have been there throughout the scope of our agreement, I don't necessarily think that we're talking about a zero-sum game here. That the organizations that you referred to, none of which the U.S. is a party to varying degrees, will share some aspects of that concept of a free and open integrated region bound by international agreement. Those are not mutually exclusive concepts. But I think if you take a look at the issue of principle, you look at the issue of standards and norms, that's what that conversation should be about. Those are not mutually exclusive, I think, to any means, except to the degree that they violate that principle.
But if we look at Nepal-US relationship for the past 70 years, Nepal's foreign policy, when it began 70 years back, was purely non-aligned foreign policy that Nepal adhered to. But over time, after the Cold War, the world changed, so did Nepal, and our foreign policy slowly shifted towards various other things. But if you look at the 21st century now, don't you think Nepal should be very comfortable having a parallel foreign policy vis-a-vis its neighbors first, and the rest of the world, included the United States of America?
I think Nepal is a sovereign country, and I think Nepal needs to make its foreign policy decisions based on what its government believes are in the best interests of her people. I think that is important. I think that has always been the very capabilities that the United States has invested in here in Nepal. For example, I will tell you, we have never asked or requested or urged Nepal to be pro-American. Of course, we value the friendship, we value the partnership. Again, we go back 70 years, and I think we've seen multiple layers of that partnership evolve, not only at the governmental level, but importantly at the person-to-person level as well. We are not expecting that to be pro-American. We are asking for Nepal, we are building capacities that lead Nepal to be pro-Nepal. That the degree to which we can invest in Nepal's independence, in its real sovereignty, its ability to identify those priorities and make them in its own best interests, I think that's the most important calculation here. That's the basis on which we have been here for 70 years investing in Nepali people's health, in their education, in their viability in agriculture, in rebuilding back after the earthquake, and in support of federalism. This again, I think, is the culmination. It's a process that has been intensifying to really look at creating that kind of ability of Nepal to exercise its sovereign rights.
But your presence in South Asia, a military presence in Afghanistan, and as you said that the US never wants Nepal to be pro-US, but your presence here for the past 70 years as a friend, as a development partner, and a help, there must be some interest of the US in Nepal vis-a-vis the region or Asia as a whole.
Our interests in the region really are driven, again, by those core fundamentals, by those principles that are at the heart of our policy and always have been. Freedom, openness, democracy. I think it's important to continue to go back to that very foundation. That, again, I can tell you, my work here in Nepal, the work of my mission, really is focused on the building blocks of what makes this country more resilient. Does that contribute in a positive way to Nepal's role in the region? You bet it does, because if Nepal becomes more democratic, more responsive to its people's needs, it becomes more economically viable and is integrated within the regional economy. Those are unmistakably good things for this country. So, to the extent that that is true, yes, and I'm very, very happy about those partnerships. But I think, that American interests here are really driven by something that I refer to as enlightened self-interest. And what that means is that many of our objectives that we work on through our embassy, the top objectives, really are those which are served with helping Nepal consolidate its stability, its security, its ability to provide a responsive, stable government. It's our engagement to help build an economy here, again, that is more vibrant, that is frankly a better trading partner, a stronger trading partner for the United States, but also provides economic opportunity for its own people. It's a country that benefits from the investment in building back better after the earthquake in partnership with your government to make sure that people have the building blocks to build and sustain productive lives. That's at the core of what we do, but the core of enlightened self-interest dictates that we are taking these steps not because we believe this is charity, not because we believe this is donor-driven, but because we believe when Nepalis are healthier, Americans are healthier. We believe that when your state is more stable and secure, our state is more stable and secure. We believe that when your people are better educated and more productive, our people will also benefit. That's what I mean by the concept of enlightened self-interest. And this is the best possible outcome I would think that Nepal would want to see, because although our objectives overlap substantially, you are doing them because the Nepali government is doing those because it's good for the Nepali people. We are doing it, which I think is also good for the Nepali people, because we also believe it's good for the American people. That's a pretty nice confluence if you're working in international diplomacy.
If I could refer back to the concept of neighbor first, Nepal is kind of committed to both our neighbors that Nepal would not allow any activity to be against our neighbors. And we strictly follow that to our best ability. How does US contribute in Nepal's no interference of neighbor policy?
Well, in fact, I think that the type of engagement that Nepal has enjoyed with the United States over decades has been the very element in terms of building sovereignty, of making Nepal more independent, more capable of representing its own best interests on the regional and the global stage. There's a clear understanding, and it's been conveyed at the senior-most levels of our respective governments, that Nepal will have a close and enduring relationship with India and with China. To do otherwise would be foolhardy. Right? So there's an understanding and an expectation that we believe firmly in Nepal's idea of amity towards all, enmity towards none. That I think that it is quite possible to build up those relationships. But at the end of the day, I think what troubles me sometimes about questions like that is that it suggests that there's a zero-sum game, or that Nepal is somehow a fixed entity that is there to be divided up. I don't believe in that. I believe that the core of our relationship here, again, is driven by enlightened self-interest, driven by Nepal's exercise of its own national sovereignty. That's what we're invested in. We are not invested in Nepal in any kind of competition with any neighboring state. That we believe that visits, that engagements, that programming, that investments from all of Nepal's neighbors can seek to grow the economy and can seek to raise up this nation. We do also believe that those should be decisions made in Nepal's own national interests, as they have. When we developed our MCC compact, for example, or when we respond to requests for military assistance and humanitarian assistance and disaster training, or any other aspect of our relationship. That's how that should be driven from our perspective.
Ambassador, post we promulgated our new constitution, and we had the three-layered elections very successfully, and we are a very devolved state now. The practice of federalism that Nepal has picked up as a polity, how does the American eye see this new change that was not prevalent back in the
40s
when we started our diplomatic ties?
Indeed. Look, I think that we are a federal state ourselves. I think that we have some experience in the challenges that federalism can pose. But we also believe that multi-tiered government is actually a great model for service delivery, of bringing the greatest value from government to people at the grassroots level. It's also remarkably complicated and difficult to do. That, we are now 243 years into our experiment as a federal democratic republic, and I think Nepal is certainly I think working through the very early stages of this, but we believe that it shows great promise for getting service delivery and responsibility for services to people at the lowest possible level. Now, I think that the challenges therein is that it takes a lot of work because it takes a lot of work, especially in the manner in which the Nepali state is creating its federal state in a top-down manner. So, what we have found to be extremely useful is that 243 years in, we still have constitutional issues that go to our Supreme Court for a definition of, is this constitutional, or does this apply to the spirit of that Constitution? So I think it's a wonderful thing that Nepal has this terrific, inclusive, aspirational constitution, but that's where the work begins. Yes. Right? Because you have to now define that in terms of law, in terms of practice. But we think it's a great start.
But in face value, after the elections, after the Constitution, we had the election, and the election was swept by the Nepal Communist Party in Nepal. And they are leading the center and 6 other provinces. And what we pick up from the American policy and American practices, the word communist is quite an itch for the United States. So how do you expect to...
Did you say itch?
Yes.
Well, I'm certainly not itchy. What I can tell you is the word that I'm most focused on is democracy. That this is how a democracy functions. That it delivered a result that has brought in this era of stability. That I think there can be far too much focus on labels, for example, and not as much of a focus of the content, I guess, of what you're doing. It really goes to my heart when we're talking about policy as well. Is really to take a look at what's in a name. I'm much more interested in looking at what's in the meaning, what's in the program, what's in the policy, what actually drives this. But democracies are democracies. Sometimes they deliver results that are expected. Sometimes they deliver results that are surprising. But it is at its core the expression of the people's will at the moment of election.
But the change that we have embarked into, and we are trying to move forward, there are certain unfinished work from the backdrop of where we began, the transitional justice and truth and reconciliation of the peace process is yet to be put to rest. So how does the United States look at the efforts that Nepal has put into these fundamental conclusions that we need to address in the immediate future?
Well, as you know, I had a chance to live and work here a decade ago in our mission, which was a very different time for Nepal. So for me, to be able to come back and see this country 10 years on and how much progress has been realized through the transitional process has been truly astounding. And I wouldn't want to undersell that. That I think the types of challenges and difficulties that the country was facing back in the late 2000s are different than those that she is facing today. That's progress that I think we have seen substantial steps through. The fact that we have had all of the major parties in some form involved in government. There are good working relationships. On the issue related to transitional justice, I think from the U.S. perspective, our interests are fairly clear. First of all, that it has to be Nepali-led. Because I'm not aware of any transitional justice initiative that had true value if it wasn't led by the people in the country in which you're trying to move past these issues, and that it has to be victim-centric. Because there was a lot of suffering obviously that existed during the conflict, and those victims have a right to be heard. So but aside from that, I think our interests are in seeing an evolution here, but one that is Nepali-led and one that serves the interests of its victims.
Now let's talk about Randy Berry as a person. We've been seeing you all around the country. We've seen you in Mustang. Probably you enjoyed a piece of yak sukuti, and we saw you enjoying your biryani in Nepalganj. What is an ambassador's job? Are those pictures representative of an ambassador of a country almost in the other side of the globe?
Well, I can only answer them for Randy Berry as an ambassador. I think it's a fundamental part, and you've appropriately pointed out that I like to eat, and I like to eat pretty much wherever I am. I think there's a really important part of this job that also is personally very important to me, and that's the ability to get out there and to explain my passion for this country. You know, I made my first visit here when I was in my 20s and really fell in love with this place. And I, like most Americans, I think, come here to see the mountains. Mm-hmm. But I've been back dozens of times and spent now more than 3 years of my life here. That's not what brings people back. What brings people back is the resiliency of the culture, the warm hospitality of the people, and the food is also pretty good. But I think, you know, establishing that and communicating that with people is really fundamentally important as we go about our work.
But if we just go back to your predecessors and ambassadors from representing other countries in Nepal, the primary connection was with the politics of the day, the politicians. Mm-hmm. But when we look at you and some of your predecessors, the US policy has slightly shifted to people than just sticking to politics and politicians of the day?
Well, I don't know that it's changed so much, but I think what has changed are the tools that are available to us to do that. That I think at the core, I mean, I've been around in diplomacy representing the United States for almost 30 years. Mm-hmm. And what I can tell you is that the people-to-people element has always been critically important. I think the ability to communicate now beyond the confines of traditional media or broadcast media, beyond our well-established exchange programs, is really the ability to use these new tools to communicate to broader cross-sections of people. I think that's how we can share our values. I think that's how we can bring attention to our programs and ways in which we seek to partner. And frankly, also, I think it's a way in which, you know, I personally have the ability to appreciate and to express my appreciation for what a remarkable dynamic country this is. Now, I think that's important because, you know, although I think most of our social media followers are Nepali, we also have a lot of Americans and internationals that follow that. And, you know, I look forward to things like Nepal's 2020 tourism year and how we can use that kind of enthusiasm, we can tell that kind of story to show people what they may not see in promotional brochures, for example. And to really, I mean, one of my greatest interests in terms of that is to really give some feature to the remarkable culture and people that drive this place, because not everybody gets to see it, and I'm one of the privileged few that does.
I really thank you for appreciating what Nepal and Nepalese have to offer to the rest of the world, and the kind words that you just said about Nepal. It's a very critical one. You may choose not to answer this. Do you think the Nepalese people are well represented in terms of politics?
Well, you know, I am the ambassador, so there really is no personal when I'm speaking. Look, what I think is that the Nepali people have a clear idea of what they would like to see evolve, and the expression of that is through democratic elections. You know, I think that as I travel around this country and I hear people talk, I think that in fact, the government's priorities that they've set out in terms of capitalizing on stability, on setting, you know, income goals that are very aggressive and need to be matched by policy in terms of getting incomes up, you know, that I think people really want a couple of things. I think they want to be free. I think they want to have freedom in every aspect of their lives. I know I've seen that. That's a commonality between the Nepalis and Americans that I've seen. I think that's a universal constant. I think they want to have work and they want to have opportunity for their children. I think these are all basic demands, but I think, you know, the Nepali people have the right, the will to express that at the ballot box, which is at the nature of a democratic republic. And we see this in my own country as well. You know, sometimes those views will change, sometimes they will evolve, but I think that those elections are a good reflection of what the people want.
And before we end, one last thing. You are very impressed by the Nepali way of life, and you expressed that you would be starting a direct dialogue with the Nepali people through Twitter. But that somehow got into a controversy. What was your intention, and why do you think it was a controversy altogether? And even the Foreign Office requested not to go on with it?
Well, I think that the use of social media tools is obviously something relatively new on the global stage in the hands of diplomats. But I would point out that members of the Nepali government, members of Nepal's own foreign service use Twitter very effectively, as I hope I am also, to tell the story about America's engagement here and to draw attention to our programs and to our priorities. I think we have a responsibility to do that. I don't think there was any controversy here. That I think that our conversation on social media is always focused on communicating American values, on soliciting views, because that's, as you would know, I think being on social media yourself, you often get those who challenge your views, who challenge things that you might say or do. I think that's an important part of the dialogue as well, that we don't want to miss out on as well. So, I think it's very much kept in the spirit of continuing dialogue with Nepal's government and with Nepal's people.
In the end, now we're embarking on our festival season. And on behalf of all our viewers, I would like to wish you a very happy Dasai, Tihar and Chhat.
Thank you very much.
And I really thank you for this opportunity to talk to us and letting us talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
And Dashainko Subhakamana.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.